Thank y'all so much for coming. I wanted to quickly tell you how this came to be and then turn it over to our experts. I was reading a Public Relations Society of America email, and it talked about a woman named Karen Hinton who was going to give a program elsewhere about BP, and I'm quoting her, "BP is the poster child for bad PR." And we realized that she was indeed one of our alums, and Dr. Norton, our dean, asked her to come. Well, then Curtis asked me, he said, well, let's have someone else talk on crisis PR. Do you know anyone who is good at crisis PR? And I said, boy, do I, Lee Ragland. And we had a hard time getting in touch with Lee. Do you know why? Because he was busy representing BP in Mississippi. So neither of them knew this was going to happen. But it turns out they both worked together a few years ago at the Jackson Daily newspaper. So they have a history. Let me quickly tell you about each of them. First to my immediate left is Lee Ragland. Lee is from Oxford. He is currently Vice President and Director of PR at the Godwin Group, which many of you have heard of. It's the state's oldest and largest PR agency. He oversees 7 PR professionals, and they provide public relations, issue management, media training, reputation management, and crisis communications. He's been there for 13 years. His clients have included financial services, law firms, telecommunications, energy companies, government agencies, and trade associations. Prior to that, he was with the Clarion Ledger for 19 years, the last 7 of which he spent on the business desk. Do you really want me to tell him when you entered Ole Miss? Okay. He entered Ole Miss in 1974 and was a student in Will Norton's first ever class at Ole Miss. And Dean Norton is not here today, but I know he'd get a kick out of that. He said to say, despite that fact, he remained in journalism and graduated in 1978 with a BA in journalism. He served on the National Ole Miss Alumni Association and is a member of the Meeks School of Journalism Advisory Board. And then Karen, who I've already quoted. Karen is the president of her own firm, Hinton Communications. It's a public relations firm based in Washington, D.C. Since 2000, her company has provided very similar services, media relations, media training, and event planning services to corporate, nonprofit, and government clients. Her expertise is promoting advocacy issues through the news media and media-related events. She previously worked as Assistant Secretary for Public Affairs for the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development for former HUD Secretary Andrew Cuomo. Before that, she served as his Senior Advisor for Communications. She served as Press Secretary for former U.S. Congressman and Agricultural Secretary Mike Espy, and as Director of Marketing Communications for the D.C. Public School System. She also worked as a senior account executive for 2 PR firms called Conway and Company in Washington and the Gable Group in San Diego, California. And she is a graduate of Ole Miss in 1980 with, I presume, a BA in journalism, and won, not once but twice, the Taylor Medal, which is the highest honor you can win in your field. So y'all help me welcome our two...
I never won that.
Didn't? Oh, well,
I
okay.
never won that.
Y'all help me welcome our 2 speakers. And Lee is going to go first, and then Karen, and then we'll throw it open to some questions if you have any. So, Lee?
Okay. I'm going to make this fairly informal. I hadn't made a presentation, but I'm not going to make y'all suffer through that. It's that'd be enough. You've got this Friday at 5. You don't need to. You've had a long week already. My role here, the way I'm looking at my role here today is I got a tweet a while ago from Proud Larry's, and it talked about the groups we're playing tonight. You know, you got your headliner and your warm-up act, and I'm kind of viewing myself as the warm-up act for the headliner here. So we're going to go it that way. And, of course, I know y'all. I know what all y'all are thinking. You got a tweet from Proud Larry's. So we'll go that. And basically, at Godwin Group, we look at PR is that we deal in really, really good news or really, really bad news. And crises are really, really bad news, and that's where we tackle that a lot of times on that. And what is a crisis in our minds? A crisis is any event that can negatively affect or impact your company. So, and what that could be is an endless list of things. You could have environmental spills, You could have fired CEOs. You could have lawsuits. The list goes on and on. Product recalls. There's all kinds of crises. Depends on your company and what you do. That said, a crisis is going to happen to you if you're in business long enough. If you're in company long enough, if you're in business, you're going to have a crisis as soon as the sun comes up. You know, that's just going to happen. One thing we deal with the University of Southern Mississippi athletic program, and a few years ago we worked with their athletic program, and we had a motto for them: anyone, anywhere, anytime. And that's kind of the way it is with a crisis. Sooner or later, if you're in business, you're going to have a crisis. And the problem is going to be, you don't know when they're going to happen, what form and shape they're going to happen, what's going to occur. The problem, and if you don't, what a crisis does and how you respond to it is going to impact your brand or reputation. That's the bottom line. How you respond and communicate in a crisis has an impact on your brand or reputation. We're going to talk about some real cases later, but I'd just like to throw out a scenario here. Let's talk about it. You're head of a PR, director of communications at a fictitious university. This university won't have a name, but it's a great American public university. And things are going good. You've gotten good coverage in the front page of the Clarion Ledger. Your enrollment's up 7%. Your freshman enrollment's up 20%. State-of-the-art dorms are creating great awareness on the school. Everything is going good. It's a gorgeous Friday afternoon before a football game. The only bad news is your football team had a bad season opener, so things are pretty good. You're feeling good about yourself. All of a sudden, your world changes in 1 minute. Either a phone call or a text or an email. A student's been shot on campus, or there's been shots on campus. How you respond to that, how you communicate after that is going to affect your reputation and your brand. And you'll see this a lot. You know, we all know about the high-profile PR cases or crisis communications in the last year. There's Toyota, BP you've mentioned. There's been Goldman Sachs. There's been several other high-profile cases. If you remember, TJ Maxx a few years ago had 45 million of their credit card numbers stolen, debit card stolen. They had a crisis on their hands. So we all know about some of the high-profile cases. But if you read the news every day, there's been high-profile crisis out there, and it's a crisis communications team that's having to respond to these. If you think about it, and this is just the last few weeks alone, if you read the paper, the egg industry. They've had to recall 500 million eggs because of a salmonella, a bacteria infection in the eggs. So I know in the past week there's been stories in USA Today and New York Times on this. Is this going to give you pause before you go to Big Bad Breakfast tomorrow, the Beacon, to have your breakfast? Is it going to make you think about the egg industry or ordering your eggs? The Mexico tourism industry, they're fighting a real battle there because of the drug lords are taking over. They've got people being killed. They've got politicians being killed. They've got visitors, tourists being killed. You know, is this going to make you think about going to Mexico? I know I've got $2. I don't want them going to Mexico for a fall trip. There's a million of other things, and you don't know where these crises are going to come from a lot of times, especially with the new media. I remember a case a few years ago, Domino's Pizza. I mean, y'all remember this. But they had 2 employees at one outlet in one of the Carolinas. And thousands of outlets, but they have 2 employees in one outlet who decided to vandalize some food. And what they did all kinds of gross things before they put the food on the pizzas that were then later served to customers. Well, naturally what you do when you do that, you videotape it on your flip camera, and then you post it on YouTube for 2 million people to see. So they've got a crisis on their hands, and how are they going to handle it, and how are they going to deal with it? I know we've talked some about national crisis, and you're saying, well, that's national. Well, you know, what have y'all done in Mississippi? Just talk to you about a few of the things that we've dealt with in the last few years in Mississippi. Like I said, we're a regional firm. We deal in several states. We had a real estate company on whose property was reported the first H1N1 flu case, known as the swine flu. First case in the Orlando area. You're talking about high traffic tourism area, real problem there. A gunman inside a bank holding hostages. A publicly held company hit with a lawsuit by a former executive who had been fired. A hospital deemed by a national study as having the worst survival rate for heart surgery in the country. Unfortunately, the CEO had already talked to a reporter before he talked to us, so we're kind of behind the 8 ball on how to deal with it. A bank listed by the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency is troubled. A large insurance company sued by hundreds of policyholders who claimed their policies weren't being handled. A church that was sued by its pastor who was involved in an inappropriate relationship. Employee fatalities at an industrial facility. And then, of course, we had the mother of all crises 5 years ago in the state with Katrina. We all know what that did to the state, left it ground zero. And I would like to share with y'all one case study there who is a real positive, admirable response to a crisis, and that was Hancock Bank, who is one of our clients who we work with. But also they did a great job with communication. As you know, right after Katrina, we're talking about ground zero, you have there are no branches open. Their employees are scattered everywhere. You're just in total disarray. So what did they do? 2 days after Katrina, they issued their first press release, first response out there, and basically saying, this is our this is our recovery plan. This is how we're going to respond. A day after that, they issue a PSA to all their employees to communicate with their shareholders and their audiences, and they issue the PSA to get the employees back in the loop. Then they appear on Squawk Box, which is a national business show, to reach out to the investor community, make folks aware of what's going on with the bank there. So they did a lot of good things, and what happened, there was real concern there because they're worried about their stock price, they're worried about losing deposits, they're worried about losing market share, and where Katrina hit was the whole footprint of their area from Baton Rouge to northwest Florida. But because of what they did in their response, 6 months after Katrina, their deposits were up, their shares were up 50% almost, and they had a bigger customer base. A year after Katrina hit, they rang the opening bell of the New York Stock Exchange. Then 5 years ago, 3 weeks ago, 5 years of the anniversary, they were featured recently on CNN, A Positive Piece. So this is kind of how you respond to a crisis is going to shape your brand, your reputation. I'm just going to open it there, and I'll take some questions later.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Lee. Karen?
Okay. Well, I'm going to stand up at the podium.
Okay.
Lee said I was the headliner, but this headliner needs a podium for comfort and a PowerPoint presentation in case I forget what I want to say. So I'm going to
go right ahead.
I just want to say I'm just delighted to be here. It's been a while since I've been back on campus, and it's just more beautiful than I remember it. Some of my happiest days were spent here, and I often tell my husband, who's here, and my kids back in Washington, and we actually live in a place called Great Falls, Virginia, right outside of D.C., stories about Ole Miss, and of course they don't really listen to me and pay much attention. So I really wanted them to come back and see the campus, and I wish they'd been able to come because maybe they'd actually believe half the stories that I tell about them. Thanks, Lee, for doing that very interesting and helpful presentation. Before I get into talking a little bit more about public relations and what I do in comparison to what Lee does, I wanted to just take a minute, especially that I see Dr. Hoare is here, to tell you a little story about Dr. Norton and about Dr. Hoare. It's hard to compare the two in terms of thinking about which one was more influential with me than the other, because I respected both of them so much and enjoyed their classes and tried to basically imagine myself being as accomplished and as smart and as interesting as they were when I was on campus and was attending their classes. But in a way, I'm kind of glad Dr. Norton isn't here. Where is he? He's in Kosovo? Slovakia? Okay. So in a way, I'm kind of glad he isn't here, because if he was here, I probably wouldn't tell this story. So in a way, I can tell it and get away with it. But one of my most fondest memories of Dr. Norton, when he was, of course, much younger then, in 1978, he was sort of a young, rebel-rousing associate journalism professor here. And he pulled me into his office one day in a very sort of secretive way and conspiratorial way that he has about when he's in sort of conversations with you, and he says, I have this really hot story for you, Karen. And at the time I was writing for the Daily Mississippian, and he said, but you can't say anything about where you're getting this from because it's very controversial within the journalism faculty. I thought, oh my gosh, what is he about to tell me? Some people want to destroy these beautiful old historic walnut doors that were on then what was Farley Hall across the Grove, or Lamar Hall. My memory is Brady. Oh, that's what it was called, right, Brady. And I believe this is right. I believe this is accurate. Tried to find the article back in my old boxes and then online, but I couldn't find it. But they want to destroy these beautiful doors, and so I want you to write about it. I go, well, okay, but tell me a little bit more. What's the significance? I mean, I was trying to be the good journalism student. He goes, well, they're historic and they're important, and I want you to go write about it. So I went out and I did a little research and wrote my story. And then magically, the day that it appeared, it was on the front page above the fold. And I was like, my gosh, why did they put this on the front page? And then I thought, okay, I remember who my source was here. And then, so I had my sort of 15 minutes of fame. It sort of turned out that Dr. Norton actually turned out to be not only a professor, but he turned out to be one of my best sources here on campus. And I'm sure that now he's dean of the school, he sort of put all that kind of mischievous behavior behind him, but maybe not. But yeah, I'll be sure and tell him that story because he will remember it. I think he will remember it. After leaving Ole Miss, I stayed in journalism for about 4 years, and I worked with Lee you were at the Clarion Ledger, and I was at the Jackson Daily News, which is the afternoon paper. But I eventually made my career in what I call public advocacy. And I do have a public relations firm, but I tend to focus on issues, and most of these issues I care a lot about. And I'm lucky enough now in my old age that I've been able to sort of pick the issues that I want to work on, and then I just spend my day talking to reporters about them. So I have a little insight both into the public relations field, but also into journalism, because I really do spend most of my day talking to reporters. In fact, today I had a 2-hour flight here, and luckily Delta has online service now in the air, the wireless on the plane, so I talked to about 4 or 5 reporters via email while I was flying here. One of the issues that I've been really involved in of late is oil contamination, but not by BP, by Chevron in the Amazon rainforest in Ecuador. I won't get into the details of that fight, except to say that it can be very, very nasty. And oil companies can play very, very tough. And I think as you see this story evolve on the Gulf Coast, when we start getting lawsuits start to be litigated by victims who are choosing, not to settle but to go into court, you're going to see a lot of tough fights start to play out. And that will have a lot to do with the way these companies handle their public relations, and then it will have a lot to do with the way the victims' attorneys, and these will mostly be plaintiffs' law firms, the way they handle their own public relations. And it's very interesting to watch. And if you're interested in this at all, just go on Google and Google Chevron in Ecuador, and you will see a lot of nasty things about me. You'll see a lot of nasty things that we've said about Chevron, and you'll find it, I think, quite interesting. Lee did a really great job, I think, describing the kinds of challenges that companies face when they have a crisis. And there are a number of things that you can do in a public relations firm or as a publicist to help the companies deal with those issues. I'm not going to go into all the different steps that you take and the different kinds of tactics that you can adopt. I really want to focus on a couple of things. And basically, I think that it can be when there are public relations crises that you can take certain steps. And then there are crises that are so big and they're so problematic, it becomes very, very difficult to deal with them. And I think BP is a really good example of that. And, instead of, you had on Wall Street the crisis where they were saying the banks were too big to fail. I think in some instances, oil companies are just too big to care. And they want the crisis to disappear. And it's not so much about making it right, but making it go away. And I think that's a problem that BP has now, and it's got to figure out how to walk this walk that it's trying to do, which is to make it right. And I think they're going to have a really difficult time doing that. I think they got off to a really good start when they said, we want to make it right, we want to take care of the problem, and we want to do right by the people of the Gulf Coast. I think they got off to a terrific start, as a matter of fact. And I don't think that Tony Hayward's, kind of stupid quotes, I mean, you'd have to sort of call them what they are, really was their problem. I don't think that was really it. I mean, yeah, I want my life back. That was not a great thing to say. What the hell did we do to deserve this? Not too smart to say. The Gulf of Mexico is a very big ocean. Not what I would have recommended if I had been his publicist. The impact will be very, very modest. Don't think that's exactly what he should be saying. But I don't think that was the problem. I think the problem for BP is that at its core, it's a flawed company. And Tony Hayward said it himself. Here's a quote where he said, basically an internal memo that Hayward had written basically believes the structure of BP is fundamentally flawed. That's when he became CEO. And I don't think he did enough as CEO to change that. And I ultimately think that that's their public relations problem now, not really the things that Tony Hayward said. And after they sort of got out there and took ownership of the problem, there were any number of memos that were leaked to the press. And so you get one memo, you get a bad article. Okay, you sort of try to fix that. Then you get another memo and another memo and another memo. And that's all this has been for the last 4 months, has been one memo after another that basically shows that BP was putting their profits ahead of safety. And I think that that's one of the main problems with this, one of their main challenges that they have now. They now have been described as basically a company that put profits over safety of people. And as a result, these memos keep coming back. And so all the newspaper articles that you see keep drilling back into these memos and showing the things that BP has said in the past or that other people have written about BP. And I also think that their PR is almost an afterthought. The company has to ingrain public relations into its business model. It has to be part of what it wants to do on a regular basis. It just can't have a crisis and then suddenly, we need a PR plan. Let's go hire a PR firm like Lee's firm and see if they can fix it for us. Because Lee can do a really good job helping them with it. But if they don't take it seriously at their core, nothing he can do will make it right. And if they're only thinking about their profits, nothing you can do as a public relations professional is going to make it right, is going to fix it for them. They have to get very serious, and it has to be part of their business model. Oh, sorry, went the wrong way. This is one of my favorite cartoons from the disaster. You can sort of see how they kind of started with their PR efforts, which was to take ownership of the problem. And they did a really good job at that at first. But then you had the memos, one after the other, and the half-truths that came out, and some of lies, just flat-out lies about things, denials and stonewalling. And that's when things kind of started to unravel. And then, of course, Tony didn't help, with his kind of crazy comments and quotes that he made. But I know you think I'm being too tough on BP, and maybe I am being too tough on them. So we'll talk a little bit about some of the things that they have done right. They did agree to pay $20 billion into a relief fund. You see, I put that up in really big letters. Down at the bottom, I'm just going to point out that they also are going to write off $10 billion in U.S. taxes this year. So, okay, they were nice about the $20 billion, but by the way, they're also taking $10 billion off of their U.S. tax return. Did I go the wrong way? I think I got that right. And remember I said, how BP wanted at the beginning that BP wanted the crisis to disappear? I mean, I sort of mean that literally. Oops, I did go the wrong way. Sorry. Here you have a picture of the oil on the beach, and then magically one day we pick up the newspaper and it's all gone. They said, hey, the oil has disappeared. The New York Times said it. Oil spill in Gulf is vanishing fast, July 28th. Well, it must be true, right? New York Times said it. It must be true. Oh, wait a minute. Stop the presses. The White House scientists, and by the way, the White House had a lot to do with that, driving that news coverage too, because the White House got out there with BP and said the oil is gone. The woman who runs the environmental office for the White House, Carol Browner, got on all the Sunday shows and said, did one after the other, and said the Sunday talk shows, the news shows, and she said the oil is gone. We don't have a problem with the oil any longer. Problem was the White House scientists who actually worked on the report backtracked from the estimates, telling a congressional committee that only 10% of the spilled oil has been skimmed and the rest are burned, and the rest, 60 to 90%, is still in the Gulf in some form. I think when you get out there and you make these kinds of statements, you better have your facts to back them up, and you better have your validators who are going to stand with you. Otherwise, you're going to make a bad situation worse. And this is what a Times-Picayune reader said in response to that story. This is a joke article, right? Do you think we are that stupid? The oil just did not disappear and all is better now. It's part of the ecosystem. Just because you can't see it doesn't mean it's not there and now it's safe. I think when a company doesn't take the public seriously and they sort of disrespect their intelligence, they're never going to have an effective public relations plan because people can see through that. People may not be reading the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal every day, but they can figure out when they're getting snowballed, when people are not telling them the truth. They can figure that out, and that's a really good example of a company not respecting the intelligence of the public, of their own public that they're trying to influence. But they did do something really right. They got rid of Tony, right? And they got Daryl and they got Bob, two good Southern boys, to stand up and do public ads, a campaign ad that I think has been incredibly effective. I think on a national level, this campaign is probably going to win awards. It's been because it's basically shown the caring side of the company. These are people who work for BP, who are from the area, who care about the area. And I think this was a very smart thing to do, and they did it quickly. They turned it around fast. Tony Hayward was in the ads, and then one day he wasn't in the ads. And Iris, too. Don't forget Iris. She's been out there, too. And so I think this has been a very, very effective ad campaign. The problem now, though, that BP faces is it's the lawyer's turn. And it's now less of a public relations effort as it will now become a legal battle. And that's when the lawyers get involved, the face of the company starts to change. And this is a recent article in the Wall Street Journal. BP report pins most of blame on others. That's lawyer spin talking there. They're getting ready, they start lawyering up, they're getting ready to start litigating, and they need to start pointing blame to others. And this is another example. The Washington Post. I mean, the BP wants you to think that they never cut corners to save money. That's what they said in the Washington Post on September 12th. But the Washington Post has been pretty clear in its coverage on it. And this is one analysis that was written by a reporter who'd been writing about it pretty regularly. If there is no smoking gun in the Deepwater Horizon disaster, it is because there is so much smoke coming from so many places. The calamity was not an accident, but rather an engineered catastrophe. Now the lawyers are going to have to start basically trying to convince you that that's not the case, that that's not true. And they're going to have a tough time, but they're going to have some of the best lawyers in the country because they can do that. They have that much money. They can get some of the best lawyers, and they're going to lawyer up, and the victims who are going to be choosing not to litigate, choosing not to settle but to litigate, they're not going to have the best lawyers in the country. They're going to be effective. They're going to be good, but it's going to be an imbalance between the two. And I think then that BP is going to have to be very careful that it doesn't come across as being too harsh, too uncaring to these people who are going to be in court. They'll start carrying out what I've come to call the 3 Ds, the triple D defense of the oil industry. They'll start denying. They're doing that now. This is not our fault. This is Halliburton's fault. This is Transocean's fault. It may be Halliburton and Transocean's fault, and probably when they all get in court, we'll figure out that it's all 3 of their faults. But they're starting to deny. Step 2 is defame. They're already in the midst of that. They're starting to defame the other 2 companies. If they follow what Chevron has done, when they start getting in court, they'll start defaming the victims themselves, the people who are in court asking for damages related to their businesses or damages to the loss of loved ones. They probably won't allow the 11 to go to court. They'll probably make sure they settle with them, and I'm sure they're not. I would think that they would be smart enough to do that. And then delay. These lawsuits will drag on for years. And so by doing these 3 things, denying, defaming, delaying, they're going to be undermining all the good stuff that they're doing as part of their ad campaign with Iris and Bob and Daryl. So this is the problem that these companies have when they're in these types of crises, because their lawyers now are going to start to drive everything. And it's going to be really problematic. And it won't be a good example of public relations. It'll be an example of a public disaster if they don't take the advice that I'm sure the very good advice that they're getting from their public relations specialists. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Karen. What questions do you have for either of our speakers? Yes.
We have an internship program. I would say apply early, and it varies from year to year, to be honest with you, depending on what's going on, our workload, what we have in the economy. We've had paid internships in the past, then we've had non-paid internships. The problem is there are 6 weeks, generally if you're there in the summer, which is how long most kids want to go, and you just start to learn everything we're doing by about the 6th week, then you're leaving. So thus the problem. I would prefer they be semester long, but if we do that, they generally would have to be students from the Jackson area. They'd have to be a Belhaven or Millsaps or Jackson State student.
Karen?
And I'm not large. My firm's not large enough really to have a lot of interns, but I would welcome any of you to send me an email if you were interested in coming to Washington, D.C., and I can certainly tell you the names of large PR firms and relationships, because I have a lot of friends who work in the bigger PR firms in Washington, and be happy to give you a recommendation or help you sort of sort that through. If you Google me, you can get my email, because my name is on a lot of press releases these days.
Not from us. No. No. You live and die by your reputation, and we've never offered a reporter money or gifts or anything like that. And I wouldn't respect a reporter who took them.
I've never had any experiences like that or known of any experiences like that. I will, though, because I think vast majority of journalists try very hard to be objective and fair and balanced. And even though my clients don't always agree with that because they can't stand anything negative written about them, I think most journalists are really trying to get at the truth and do a pretty good job at it. But I will tell you this quick story. In my fight that I'm having right now with Chevron recently tried to hire a freelance journalist to pretend to be a journalist in Ecuador and go around and interview people who say they are sick from the oil contamination, to see if they really are sick or if they're just lying about it. And so she was supposed to go and pretend to be a journalist, but she would really be a spy for Chevron. And Chevron had hired this big private investigative firm named Kroll. I don't know if you guys know them, but they're a big private investigative company, to go and find a journalist to do this. And so they took her to Bolivia, and she had this really, fun night with the Kroll private investigator, and he bought her dinner, and they chatted. And then she realized how highly unethical this would be if she were to do it. And she was broke. She didn't have a lot of money. A lot of people in journalism are losing their jobs, and it's very hard for them right now. So she was a little tempted. She admitted that. And they were going to pay her $20,000 to go do 2 weeks of work in Ecuador trying to interview sick people to see if they were lying about being sick. I mean, this is, the second largest oil company in the United States, and this is the kind of things they're willing to do to get bad news about the people who are suing them. Hardest thing I ever dealt with? Well, for 2.5 years, I was director of communications for the D.C. public school system. And that was one of the best jobs I ever had, because it really taught me how to think fast on my feet, because I had to do interviews on street corners with television cameras talking about shootings. And at that time, D.C. was just suffering from a bad crack cocaine epidemic that had just taken over the inner city part of the district. Not anywhere like that anymore, but that was back in the 90s. And I had to stand on the corner and talk about this on a pretty regular basis, because we were having shootings in neighborhoods all the time, and knifings and that sort of thing. And that was really hard for me to do. It was hard, literally hard for me to do, because, I had people standing behind me waving at the cameras while I was trying to be interviewed, so that was difficult. But it was also hard because I knew what dedicated teachers there were in the schools, and I knew some really just fantastic students who were trying to do really well in school, and so to have to defend a school system for that kind of activity, that they didn't have anything to do with. It was just in the neighborhoods. That was really tough, and that was hard, and it was really tough to get a positive message out under those kind of circumstances. I learned a lot.
Is that Karen's mic we're hearing?
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
Stuart.
Lee, you want to take that?
Didn't you direct it at you?
Well, just real quickly, I think you always put your best facts, your best personal experiences, your best stories, whatever you've got, kernels of information that you have that makes the best argument for your company that you're representing. You have to get those facts out in front of, let's say you're talking to a reporter. Let's just say that's the relationship, that's the person you're trying to influence. You have to get that information in front of them, and it has to be accurate. It has to be concise. You can't just, go on and on, because the reporters have, they all have ADD. They have attention spans that are very short, and they need to, because of the 24/7, media cycle now. So it's got to be truthful. It's got to be concise, and you want to make it compelling and interesting, so that it's unique and a little different, so that then they'll be motivated to use it, right? Because they're always looking for a new, different way of saying something, so that it's interesting to their reader or their viewer. So I think you take the information that you have and you make the most of it, and You get it in front of the reporter, and you don't be shy about it. Sometimes I think public relations people are too shy about getting in reporters' faces. Pick up that phone, call them back, email them, go see them, take them for coffee. Don't be shy. You have a right to be talking to that journalist. They sometimes want to make you feel like, oh, you're bothering me, I'm too busy, it's you again. You just got to shake that off and just do your job and stay with them. Back here?
Obviously, there's a lot of animosity towards the old companies, especially right now, but has been over the last 10 to 20 years. With the Exxon case in Alaska, especially the BP case now. And you started off your presentation talking about how BP's about to start the litigation. They can go on for years and years and years. Now, with the $20 billion that they set aside to kind of basically subsidize a lot of funds for companies and people who might be dealing with the leak, I guess kind of flipping the coin a little bit, do you feel that a lot of these cases are going to spend 10 plus years in court? Do you feel that a lot of the people who are going to these cases are doing it because they have legitimate cases, or the country's kind of very sue happy right now when it comes to, oh, the settlement I got isn't enough, I want more, and with BP going to court, do you think that BP is going to court because they think they need to defend their case, or that they just have the deep pockets to spend it years and years and years, hopefully the person that's coming after them is going to have the money?
Is that for me or Lee? Well, I think everything you said, there's a possibility of that all being the case. I think there will be some people who will file lawsuits who shouldn't file lawsuits. But that's what the justice system is. I mean, it figures itself out in time. I also think there will be people with very legitimate claims, and BP will want to fight them. If they're smart, they will limit the number of cases that they will fight. I think they should fight some of them. They shouldn't just let cases that are not legitimate, they shouldn't just, some of them they may settle. They may just settle instead, even though they don't think they're legitimate. But that's the trick that they'll have to figure out for protecting their shareholders, protecting their profit margins, and at the same time putting forth the right kind of public face that they need to continue to improve their image after this really terrible crisis that has, some would say, ruined the brand, and they'll never be able to recover. Is that me? Sorry. Anyway. But the case in Ecuador has been going on for 17 years. So, they've been, the people who are behind this case for the Ecuadorians are very committed. Most people would never stay in a case for that long. So the hope is that we just go away, give up and go away.
Did you want to add anything?
No, I'm all right. I'll let you next question. I'll let her take this. Oh, I think everybody's had clients that care about money more than what's doing right. I mean, unfortunately, and you have to take a position. What do you do? I mean, what do you feel is right? We've had clients that have come to us, and we've talked long and hard. Do we want to work with these people? I mean, do we want to accept their business? And some of them, bring a lot of money. But do you want to do what's right? We've turned down clients before because we did not agree with their position on some things or what they were doing or their actions. So, you just have to look inside yourself and say, who do I want to work with? Who do I want to be associated with? And move forward.
Do you want to add anything? Okay.
One of the major issues in Ecuador is it pollution or increased bribery and playing business with the government or all those things?
All those things. I mean, mainly, this happened in the early 70s, and it was a jungle, it was a rainforest, and the only people who lived there were the indigenous tribes. And it was actually Texaco who actually came in and developed the concession area, the oil exploration sites. And the government then didn't really represent the indigenous people of Ecuador at that time, and they were pretty much either military dictatorships. And they just let Texaco come in and do whatever they wanted to do in the rainforest to develop the oil, and there's plenty of oil there still is. But Texaco didn't develop any kind of system for disposing of what's left over after drilling, the formation water. So the formation water is highly toxic because it has all these chemicals in it. And then there's also oil left over. And so Texaco just would literally dump the formation water, and there are billions of gallons of formation water from all this drilling, just dump it into the waterways of the rainforest. And then they build these huge, huge pits that are almost as big as, or bigger than Olympic-sized pool. And they didn't line them, and they just dumped all the leftover mush into these pits, and there are over 900 of them in an area about the size of Rhode Island. And so over time, it's been now for almost 5 decades, the oil and the chemicals and the toxins that are in the formation water have just leached down into the ground, into the water system. And so you can literally go to, and I don't want to get into too much detail, but you can literally go into water wells that are there that people drink from and see the sheen of the oil on the water. And so, of course, this is still not a very developed area, but now there are more people who live there than just the indigenous tribes because people move there to work for the oil company. And so you have about 30,000 people there who live there now. And there are high rates of cancer deaths and spontaneous abortions and respiratory illnesses. And I'm giving you my side of this story. I mean, you go online, you'll read about Chevron's side, and they have their arguments.
Karen, can I ask you a question about your 3 Ds? If you were advising BP, I take it you look at the 3 Ds as being negatives, but you've got to divorce management from PR. The management making its decisions what's best they think for their company. How would you suggest that they modify your 3 Ds to make them less disastrous or more advantageous to the company?
Well, I hear your question. I would take a little exception to it, though. I don't think you can divorce PR from management. I think PR has to be part of management, which is the point I was trying to make, is that companies that are successful at public relations always are thinking about their public relations. It's never not part of what they're doing.
Who would you say is successful at public relations?
I think actually Exxon has done a pretty good job of managing their public relations since the Valdez spill. We never read about Valdez much anymore. And they have actually, from what I have read, and I'm no expert on oil industry practices, but what I have read, Exxon has done a lot to improve their safety record. And so they don't have the number of spills. I mean, you always have spills, but they don't have the number of spills that BP has. And so I think they've actually done a very good job of, one, they improved their safety record, and then they did a good job of promoting the fact that they've improved their safety record. Now, they may not have improved their safety record, but they've convinced me through a number of articles that I read about them that they have. So, but I just think these two things have to be interwoven. You just don't go, oh, we need a PR plan. Oh, we need a crisis plan when you have your crisis. That's got to be part of your business model, that you're always thinking about that. So when you do have a crisis, you're not playing catch up, or you're not, you've already thought through a lot of these issues.
I'd like to ask both of you, since you have a room full of students, many of whom are considering careers in PR, what skills, qualities, traits make a good PR professional? And I'll ask you first, Lee, and then Karen.
Well, I think my reporting background helped a lot. I think, of course, we're biased, but I think reporters probably make the best PR people because you know how the media works, you understand their deadlines, you know what they're looking for. So, I think the reporting background really helps a lot in PR. Now, our department has people who aren't reporters. We have people who came from the hospitals, who came from nonprofits, everything. But I personally just think a reporting background. Of course, now PR does not stand for press release. You got to understand, PR. We're in the communications business, and really PR is kind of getting outdated a little bit. We're in the communications business. It's just not going to. You're not going to deal with the media. You're going to be dealing with your stakeholders, your target audiences. Like we're talking about, let's say if you had an incident on campus, you're just not going to be dealing with the newspapers who are going to be calling you, but you're going to have to be communicating with your students. You're going to be communicating with the local community. You're going to be communicating with the faculty. There are a lot of different audiences you have to communicate with. It's just not the media. And that's what makes Crisis so tough sometimes, because it's pretty chaotic. And it's a lot going on. You're getting thrown a lot of different things thrown at you. And, there's a PR guy, a crisis communicator. He says, if you think it can't get worse, just give it 5 minutes and it will. So that's a part of the crisis. It's a tough situation when there's a lot going on.
So you'd say the ability to handle stress is important.
And multitask. You have to be able to do a lot of things. You just can't say, I need to send out this press release, or I need to meet with a reporter. There's a lot of different hats you have to wear.
Yeah, I would agree with all of that. I think there are really 3 skills that I clearly have not mastered, but if you're going to be successful at public relations, I think you need to, and that is to be first and foremost a clear thinker. Is to really figure out what is it that I need to be saying right now to that audience. And so it's understanding the audience and then understanding what you need to say and being very clear about that in your own mind. And then being a very good writer. And that doesn't mean a verbose writer. It means clear, concise, short, simple, but also compelling and interesting. So a good writer, and then also a good talker. You're just going to be talking a lot to a lot of people, and so you want to be able to be articulate and clear about. And people who are good writers are not necessarily good talkers. You might be excellent at putting it down on paper, but can you get it out of your, can you verbalize it? And so I think if you're good at those 3 things, you're going to be really good at public relations. Doesn't mean you can't do public relations, but you can't do all 3 well. But
how about your reporting background, Karen? Did you find that helpful?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I'm not a great writer, but I became a much better writer because of an editor that I had at the Jackson Daily News. And I would go to the city council. I covered the city council in Jackson. That's my first beat. And I would go to city council meetings, and I would come back, and we called it inches then. I'd come back, and I would write 40 inches about a sewer bond. Well, nobody really cared about a sewer bond, but I thought they should. Hey, it's a sewer bond. It's important, and you're going to know everything there is to know about the sewer bond. And, the editor, would chop everything off, and would go from 40 to 12 inches. And I would be outraged that he would be editing my masterpiece. But I eventually figured out that, that's not the case, and nobody really wanted to know that much about the sewer bond. But that was a really good experience for me, for him to really just take me under his wing and help me figure that out.
As they say, it's much harder to write short than it is to write.
Absolutely. That's right.
We have time for one more question.
Have either one of you been in situations where you had a client or account of some sort that you knew was completely wrong in the situation? It's kind of like the lawyer who has to defend the murderer who they knew did it, but that's still their job to defend them. Have you ever been in a situation? If not, what could you possibly do in a situation? Kind of like you knew was completely at fault, but it's still your job to be their PR agent. And if you have that situation, what's a good way to handle that type of situation, knowing that you have to stand up in front of the media or write a press release for a client who knew was completely wrong in this situation? What would be the best way to handle that if you haven't actually had that example so far?
Either of you want that?
You're going to have clients who are wrong at times. I mean, you're going to have clients where bad things happen. I mean, you have industrial facilities that have fire explosion where people die. I mean, that's just it is. Wednesday afternoon, I got called in a meeting. I have a client who has an industrial leak. I mean, they're at fault. They got to get it fixed. But you have to convey the message. They're going to do the right thing. They're going to take the steps. I mean, they're going to be at fault sometimes, but you have to work with them. I mean, that's very clear and all, but it's just the way it is.
I think that you never want to be in a position where you are knowingly lying about anything to a reporter, and I don't think Lee's saying that. You just cannot do that, because once you do that, you lose all your credibility, because eventually you will be discovered, and so you always have to be truthful. You can just choose not to go there. You try to avoid that issue. But at some point, if you've got a client who's saying something, they want you to say that, and you know that it's not true, then you're going to have to tell the client, we can't do that because this puts the company at risk, and we can't do that. So we've got to figure out another solution, or you're going to have to go find another firm. And I know people who do that. I mean, who have done that.
One thing we do media training for companies and bring people in, train them how to work with the media. First thing we say is never lie, just up front. Because as you say, you're going to get caught, and it doesn't work.
I think my students have heard that before.
And don't write memos.
And
you don't want read later.
Yeah, paper trail. And we also tell them don't say no comment, because if you say no comment, you look guilty. Now, there's other ways to say no comment, roundabout ways, but you don't say no comment.
Well, Karen, Lee, thank both of you so much for spending your
you.
Friday afternoon with us. And